Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today. We're going to dive right in because we are exploring a reef tank's ultimate secret weapon. Look, if you've ever felt like you're fighting a losing battle keeping your saltwater aquarium pristine, believe me, you are not alone. Today, we're unpacking the science and strategy behind a literal biological powerhouse that can completely transform your aquatic ecosystem. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The nuisance nutrient problem. 2. What is a refugium? 3. Common refugium setups. 4. 4 main reef benefits. And 5. Setting up for success. All right, let's get into it.
So let me ask you a question that pretty much every single reef keeper has muttered in pure frustration at least once. Why on earth is algae taking over your reef, right? You clean the glass, you scrub the rocks, you do your religious water changes, and yet that stubborn, ugly green or brown fuzz just keeps coming back. It's kind of the universal struggle of the hobby, isn't it?
To figure this out, we first have to jump into Section 1, the nuisance nutrient problem, and those unseen threats in your tank.
You know, when we all first set up a reef tank, we're totally drilled on the nitrogen cycle. We know that keeping ammonia and nitrate at absolute zero is standard practice just to keep our fish and corals alive. But once your tank is cycled, the real invisible culprits behind those massive, ugly algae blooms are what we call nuisance nutrients. Specifically, we're talking about nitrate and phosphate. Now, they aren't necessarily toxic at low levels, but man, they are pure fertilizer for exactly the things you do not want growing in your tank.
So formally, nuisance nutrients are inputs like nitrate and phosphate that fuel unwanted algae problems instead of promoting actual coral growth. But here's what's really interesting about this. These nutrients are constantly, literally every single day, being added to your tank whenever you feed your fish. They naturally need a place to be consumed, and if you don't give them a designated place to go, well, they're going to just fuel algae directly on your prized display rocks.
And that perfectly brings us to Section 2. What is a refugium? The biological solution.
Simply put, a refugium is a dedicated compartment in a reef aquarium designed to support beneficial marine life like microalgae, macroalgae, and tiny cleanup organisms, think copepods and amphipods. Because this specific area is run completely differently from your main display tank, it acts as this incredible additional layer of biological filtration. And honestly, the absolute best part? It does all this heavy lifting without adding an ounce of stress to your main reef habitat. It's a real game changer.
I absolutely love this quote directly from our source material. A refugium is a nutrient sink and a biodiversity booster. I mean, that just brilliantly hits the nail on the head, right? It perfectly illustrates the dual purpose here. It's not just a standard filter. It actively takes those nuisance nutrients we just talked about, the nitrates and phosphates, and absorbs them right into plant biomass. Then, that very same plant biomass becomes the perfect, cozy habitat and food source for tiny, beneficial animals. It's literally a complete, miniature ecosystem working for you.
To really wrap our heads around how this works, let's look at this comparison. Think of your main tank as your showroom. It is completely optimized for stability, clear viewing, and pristine appearance. You obviously don't want a wild jungle of algae in there. Your refugium, on the other hand, is your engine room. It is optimized purely for biological productivity. It doesn't have to look pretty at all. It just has to work incredibly hard behind the scenes, so your showroom can look absolutely flawless.
So let's move right into Section 3, common refugium setups and finding your perfect fit.
There isn't just one single way to build this engine room. There are really 4 main approaches, and picking the right one depends entirely on your own personal goals. For example, you could build a macroalgae refugium, which usually uses a wiry green algae called Cheeto under incredibly strong lights to aggressively suck up nutrients. Or maybe a deep sand bed, using a thick layer of sand to foster deep, layered microbial activity. Now, if you want to breed fish food, a planted or sump refugium with low flow creates these perfect little microhabitats for pods. And finally, a light-managed design ensures that your high-powered plant-growing lights don't accidentally spill over and start growing algae in your protein skimmer compartment.
All right, we know what it is and how to build it. Now for Section 4. 4 main reef benefits, and why this matters to your ecosystem. When you finally add a dedicated refugium to your filtration loop, you are unlocking exactly 4 crucial ecosystem-altering benefits. Let's break these down one by one.
Benefit number 1, reduced nuisance algae pressure. And guys, this is the big one. When you have a dedicated compartment where macroalgae is actively and aggressively growing under intense light, it basically acts like a giant sponge. It consumes the nitrate and phosphate right out of the water column first. By doing this, it effectively starves out that unsightly hair algae and film algae that's trying to take over your display tank. You're just giving those nutrients an easier, way more appealing place to go.
Moving on to benefit number 2. Improved biological filtration. See, your refugium doesn't just grow plants. It fosters rich, diverse microbial communities in the rock and sand you put down in there. These microbes are incredibly efficient at processing complex waste products. They act as the absolute perfect biological complement to the mechanical filtration of your filter socks and the chemical export of your protein skimmer. Benefit number 3 is, in my opinion, arguably the most fascinating part of all this: more pods and a stronger food web. Think of a refugium as a totally safe haven. Because there are 0 predatory fish allowed in the engine room, copepods and amphipods can just breed exponentially. And as their populations explode, they naturally get caught up in the return pump's current and are safely transported right up into the main display tank. You are literally generating a continuous 100% natural supply of live food for your corals and your finicky fish. How cool is that?
And finally, we have benefit number 4, greater system stability over time. The absolute most crucial thing to remember is that a reef tank thrives on stability, right? Not wild, crazy swings. So instead of reacting to an algae outbreak by dumping harsh, quick-fix chemicals into your water, a biologically driven pathway like a refugium smoothly and continuously manages your nutrient inputs. It processes the waste at the exact same steady rate your fish produce it, completely freeing you from that stressful roller coaster of rapid nutrient swings.
Now that we know the incredible benefits, let's jump into Section 5, setting up for success, getting your engine room right. Look, setting this all up doesn't have to be overwhelming at all. Just follow this simple 3-step procedure. Step 1, choose a style. Be super intentional here. Are you focusing mostly on nutrient uptake with fast-growing algae or pod support with calmer waters? Step 2, plan practical details. Like, you really need the right spectrum of lighting to grow macroalgae, and the flow must be gentle enough to not wash everything away, but consistent enough to actually deliver those nutrients. And step 3, safely separate from pests. You want highly controlled conditions that are perfectly compatible with the rest of your filtration plan. But you definitely need to beware, because setting up an engine room is really only helpful if you avoid these common mistakes. First off, do not starve your macroalgae by underlighting it. I promise you, it needs serious wattage to grow and actually consume those nutrients. Second, don't neglect your maintenance and let it become a nasty breeding ground for detritus and nuisance pests like Aiptesia. And finally, this is a big one. Don't oversize it. If it's too big, it can rapidly strip the water completely bare, which competes with your other filtration needs and can actually starve your corals of essential trace elements. This quote from the source material absolutely perfectly summarizes the ultimate goal here. A refugium that is productive but not chaotic is the sweet spot. You are basically aiming for perfect balance. You want this dedicated growth and processing zone that just quietly hums along in the background, building you a tough, resilient reef without requiring constant, stressful micromanagement from you. Which leaves us with this final thought. You now know the absolute secret behind tackling those invisible threats and building an incredibly stable, entirely natural food web. So take a hard look at your own tank and ask yourself, how will you turn your reef's nuisance nutrients into a thriving, resilient ecosystem? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today on The Explainer. Get out there, start designing your engine room, and I'll catch you next time.